Hello, this is part two of the travel expenses travel report video um, regarding submitting receipts for travel expenses on an expense report in Workday. In this video, I will be covering details such as how to handle conference registration and conference travel, rental cars, gas receipts, personal vehicle mileage, um, meals with alcohol, etc., things like that. So I'm going to get right into it. If you've already watched the first video, then this first part I'm gonna kind of breeze through this. So if I'm going a little too fast, feel free to check out the first travel expenses video to get a little more detail on where I'm going with this. But I'm going to go straight into Workday here, and I'm going to get to my expenses hub, and then I'm going to create a new expense report. So let's just get us right to the top of the order here. Now, once again, for travel expense reports, we need to list the destination city as well as the travel dates and what it is we're traveling for. Now, I'm going to admit for this example, I'm going to kind of throw a whole bunch of different receipts together that really don't have to do with the same report. So I'm just going to make up some information here. So I'm going to say travel to Chicago on May 9th, 2023 for my birthday and research, which this totally would not be accepted, but I'm just going to throw it in there for this example. So the memo is required as well as the business purpose. We're going to say this is research travel. Now, I am, like I said, going to be going through conference travel. So you would select this for conference travel. You would do research travel if it was research. So select the one that works for you. And I do recommend, since only one business purpose is allowed per expense report, please try not to mix expenses from one trip with another. You can do that, but they really should be all the same type of travel when it comes to the business purpose. So if you do have conference travel, you should not be submitting those expense receipts on the same as a same report as you're submitting for research travel or for study abroad or things like that. So try and keep those separated between different reports. But I'm going to just say this for this example, just so we can kind of skip ahead and get to the receipts. So again, I'm setting this up as a reimbursement. If I had Procard charges, I would select them down here and then I would click OK. But since this is reimbursement only, we're going to go straight into the expense lines page. Again, I'm not going to go over the details of how this is all laid out. Please watch the first travel expense video to get more details on how this is all laid out. I'm just going to go in and start adding some expenses here to show you how to handle these things. So first, I'm going to add a new expense, and we're going to look at conference travel. So if I was doing a registration, I would upload a receipt for registration, and then I would type in, you can just do even partial word and then hit enter, and you've got these three things that come up. Because registration could be a tax or license, but that doesn't apply here. We're either going to use conference fees or other registration fees. Conference fees is where we should be charging all conference fee related or conference related fees, whether it be registration fees or additional fees to attend a certain seminar in a conference. Other registration fees we're reserving for other types of expenses, and I'll go over those in a different video. Conference fees is the one we're going to choose here. Again, the expense date should match whatever the transaction was. Now, I don't actually have a registration here, but I'm gonna just say that I purchased this last month. I'll say that was defaulting to today's date, so we're just going to say I purchased this there. The key to know about conference fees, usually registration fees for conferences are pretty straightforward. You get a receipt, you upload it, and you enter in the expense date to have it match the transaction date. You enter in conference fees of the expense item, and you say that you spent $200 on the registration. That's pretty straightforward. The thing that you have to be aware of when you're visiting a conference, when you're going to a conference specifically, this doesn't really apply for remote conferences, but for traveling to conferences, it's very important to note that WashU has a policy of not reimbursing meals for conference travel if the conference registration that you already paid for includes any paid meals. And I'm going to show you an example of that really quickly here. For this example, I'm just going to throw in this as my receipt just so that there's a document there and I don't get a warning for it. I'm going to pull this all in here. And then, oh, it's saying that I need to add in this because when I chose conference fees, it did pop up these additional details on the side. So I have to list myself as the traveler, the recipient, of the registration, and the destination we're going to say is Chicago, even though I know that that's not correct. So that's just for this example, if you actually have this in here, fill this in with proper information, obviously. And these are the only 3 required fields here. You do not need to fill in the start or end date of travel. Those are not required since we entered those on the header memo. So now we update here. That gets rid of that red hard stop warning, and we're going to add a new receipt. So actually, I'm sorry, before we go to a new receipt, I did want to show you that if we had a meal at this, which I'm going to go in and show you a social meal here in a second, but I did want to show you actually this document here that I have is the conference details for this conference that's happening. And if you scroll down to page 10, I'm keeping track down here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we can see here what the costs are. And there is a gala dinner. If you look here, you can see that on these 2 days, there's the itinerary events. This is what WashU requires. Whenever you are going to be submitting meal expenses while you're at a conference, WashU wants this document to be attached because they want to see, wait, on these days during this itinerary, are there any things that were paid for? Now we can see that there's a lunch here, but that's just a lunch break for, it looks like an hour and 45 minutes or so. But it's not a paid lunch, like it's not included as part of the conference. This gala dinner down here is actually included. So if we skip back forward here, we can see that the gala dinner costs $60 for any attendees that want to go. If the fees that you paid for included that $60, then we would not reimburse any dinner expenses on the evening of September 5th. Okay, WashU is looking at that. So if you ever submit a meal expense with a conference as the purpose of the trip, they're going to ask for this document to make sure that you didn't go out and skip this gala dinner even though you paid for it, because they're not planning on paying for dinner twice. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. It's kind of an out there rule. It doesn't really hit all the time, but I wanted to let you know about it. So in that case, say this was our registration and I had a different expense line. This isn't an actual receipt, but it is a document that WashU requires to have. So the way we upload that is we actually go to this attachments tab here. It's one of the few times we actually use this tab. Usually we're skipping between header and expense lines and we just use those. This is the one place where it's a great idea to use this attachments tab. We click that edit button, it opens up the ability to drag and drop in or select from browsing, and we're just going to pop that right in there. So now we have that document there for AP to review when they get this document, and now we'll be covered for any meals that we submit, as long as they don't, interact with that date and that gala dinner that we may have paid for. So that's the first thing I wanted to cover with that when it comes to conferences. The next thing I want to cover is I'm going to pick the next receipt that I have here, which is a social meal in Germany. Now, there's a couple things that I want to point out about this. This one we do have, let's see, the date is 6/25/22. So this is from last year, but I'm just going to go ahead and use that date just so we have it entered in, 6/25, and then the expense line here. So this is actually a social meal. You can see that there were, 12 drinks here, or 12 people. I'm not sure what this is. I think it's a per person charge, cover fee or something. Some waters down here, some meals, and some wine, glasses of wine. So there was a number of people here. So some required pieces of information we need for social meal. First, we need to put in social. And when we click social, we're going to bring up social and entertainment, purchases and supplies. We do have multiple options here. This is the right option. Purchases and supplies is what we use for paying for meals with a group. All right. And make sure not to choose social entertainment services. That's a completely different category. This is the correct category. We know that the total here is 343 euro. This is being charged in euros, paid in cash in Germany. This was not US dollars. So the thing we need to know about that is we put in the total amount here, 343, but it is not US dollars. You can actually change the currency by Xing that out, typing in whatever the currency is that we paid in. we do euros, and that automatically factors what the currency rate was based on the expense date. It doesn't do it for current, it actually uses this date. So it's very important that you put in the expense date to match when the transaction actually happened. So even though they paid in cash, you're getting reimbursed based on the currency exchange rate of when the transaction happened. It'll automatically do the math and tell you that you're getting this much reimbursed to you. All right. Now, of course, when we choose social and entertainment purchases and supplies, that again pops up this additional set of fields over here. There are no red asterisks here, but these are actually required, and this document will be sent back to you if you do not fill this in. Now, the thing to know about social and entertainment, and I do cover this in another video, but it still applies here, whether you're traveling or having a local social meal, you need to ask if this falls under the 1213 rule. It's always going to fall under the 1213 rule. You just have to figure out how it's going to apply. So the 1213 rule, kind of a term that I've made up, but it's a WashU policy that states if you have 12 or fewer attendees at a social meal, you are required to list each individual attendee's name. So if I had 10 here as the number of people, which it looks like I think we had exactly 12. So if the answer is 12 here, I could either add in 12 people, but I can't just leave my name here. I'd have to actually add in each person's name, so I could add, if Kim Anderson was there, we're gonna add Kim Anderson. Yeah, Meredith Cougar was there. We could add her in. So we just add in each person's name. All employees are automatically going to be in this database, but say, usually a social meal includes yourself or WashU faculty or staff or employees in general, and at least one non-WashU person. If this was a group meal and it was paying for all employees, then there's actually a different category, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But right now, we're assuming this is a social meal, that there was actually some non-WashU staff or faculty or employees involved. So if you need to add that person's name, they're obviously not going to be in the database. So you would go to this create guest. So we can see here, the name is the only required part. I'm just going to put a name in here. And you could put a title, you could put a company if you want to. It's not required. You at least have to have the name. You click OK, and that automatically adds that new guest to the list. Okay, I'll show you that one more time. Create guest. Right, so we got a new guest here, and it automatically adds to it. All right, so we can just keep adding those names until we get up to the total number of people. Now, the other half of the 1213 rule is if you have 13 or more attendees, then you don't need to list all the individual names. It will require you to have at least one name here. So you just leave your name, and then you say there was actually 16 people there. And now all you need to do is have the number of people. If it's a very, very large group of people, if you were paying for an entire room of conference attendees to have a drink or something, and it's like 50 people or so, I mean, you're not exactly sure how many people there were, you can put the approximate number of people. That's fine as well. Okay, it should approximately match what the transaction is being, is saying you paid for, and it should match approximately the dollar amount. Realistically speaking, how many people you paid for and what you actually paid for. The business topic is also not required, but it is helpful information to have. So if you explain why you had the social meal, who you were meeting, or what the purpose of the meeting was for. So that is that. Now, the other thing I want to point out is on social meals, whether they're local or traveling, you always need to break out alcohol. Now, when you're traveling, you do not need to break out sales tax. There was no sales tax charged in this, or there was. I know in euros, they actually wrap it up in the actual price on the receipt, so it's not split out separately. But in any case, when you're traveling, you don't need to break out sales tax, so that's fine. But you do need to break out the alcohol. So what's very helpful is if you mark up this receipt, either put an asterisk or a letter A, or highlight each of the lines that have alcohol, so we can easily see how much of this needs to be split out to alcohol. I processed this last year, and I can't remember exactly how I split this out, but I believe these three lines with the vino and maybe one or two other lines up here were also. So you basically just add up the total amounts for alcohol, and then you come in here and you use the itemization button. It says use this itemization only if your company's expense policy requires itemizations, and it does when it comes to alcohol. So always break out alcohol. So say, for example, I'm just going to use these three lines. So we have 13, 13, and 26. So it's a total of $52. Excuse me. $52 in alcohol. So we are going to click this add itemization button. And what that does is it basically just duplicates what we had out there. It's just a single line here. And we're going to have $52 that we're going to charge to alcohol. If we type that in and hit enter, it brings up the non-travel or the travel option. We're going to choose travel since this was in Germany. And then we're going to scroll down to the bottom here and we can see this add button. We click that. And now we can see, since we broke out $52 up here under alcohol, we have social entertainment as the default again, because that's what we did entered out here on the main page. And we can see exactly how much we have left to itemize. So if that much was alcohol, this much has to be everything else. So we can just put in 291 as the total, hit tab, and it automatically updates it, and it zeroes out the balance remaining. And then you can click done, and now you can see you've itemized your expense. So you have 343 total in euros. You are going to break out based on what's actually on the receipt. So you're not expected to break out what is the exact amount in US dollars. You're actually breaking out the amount of the original receipt, and that will split that out so that when this converted amount gets split, it'll actually split out the right amount to US dollars when it actually hits the accounts. So you don't have to worry about doing the reverse math there and figuring out all those steps. So it's very helpful if you can do that, and also very helpful if you edit your receipts to make sure that it's clear to us in the accounting office and further on down the line which items are alcohol and which ones aren't. All right, so I've got all that updated. I'm going to go in here and click the update line so that it pulls in that information. And we're going to move right on to the next receipt. So we've got next up is mileage. All right, so I'm going to show you a mileage example here. So mileage is only reimbursed to employees when they drive a personal vehicle for travel. All right, very specific rules about gas receipts, car rentals, and mileage. So just remember, if you're driving your own vehicle for whatever reason, and usually there has to be a reason for it, you know, that you couldn't, take a rental or fly or, and get a rental there, use cabs or whatever. There's got to be some explanation for why you did one thing or another. Usually mileage especially for a longer distance trip is going to be more expensive, as you'll see here when I go and enter this information in. So you might need to add some additional explanation. You can either add that in the memo here, or you can add additional documents to the expense report in the attachments line here, a memo of some sort saying this is why I used my personal vehicle and I'm requesting mileage reimbursement. So the way we do mileage reimbursement is we actually just go out to Google or whatever your favorite maps program is, and we map out our drive from one Brookings Drive in St. Louis to whatever our destination is. In this case, it's the Block Museum of Art in Chicago. All right, so we have that, and it shows. I don't know if you can see this very well or not, but it shows. Nope, sorry. It shows right here 318 miles for a one-way trip from one Brookings Drive to the Block Museum of Art. All right, so that's our mileage. Now, of course, if we're driving there and driving back, then we're going to have to double that mileage. So you're going to do a screenshot of this mileage, and then you're going to print it or save it, and that's going to be your receipt. All right, so we'll actually pull this in here. All right, and then we can change the date to be whatever the actual travel date was. So, of course, it's adding the expense line based on the last one, or the expense date based on the last line. So we'll just say that this happened, this year. A few months ago, and then for the expense item, we're going to choose mileage. Now, when you type in mileage and enter, it does bring up several different options. Mileage business is the one that you're going to choose for all your standard business travel. If you're traveling for research, if you're traveling for a conference, whatever the case may be, it's usually not going to be one of these others. And if you're not sure, feel free to reach out to us before you get to this point in the expense report, and we can try to help figure out what the right option is. But usually it's going to be that mileage business. Now, when you select that, it automatically gives you this rate used, and the quantity now is going to be the quantity of miles. So again, referencing our trip over here, we know that it's 318. And if we were going to double it for a round trip, then it's basically 318 there, 318 back. We don't count mileage of driving around in Chicago while we're there. It's just the mileage there and back. This is just the trip to and from. If you wanted to get additional mileage for several trips you made in Chicago, then you have to pull up a different map showing from the Block Art Museum to other locations and back and forth. Those would be allowed, but This is just for the trip to and from. So again, 318 times 2 is going to be 636. 318 times 2, and that automatically factors in 416.58 based on the mileage. So you have to imagine that driving a car to Chicago and back is a bit more expensive than just taking a quick Southwest flight. Usually those flights are, $100, $150 for a round trip. So, I guess on a good day, could be a little more expensive, but this is usually going to be more expensive than a round trip airfare. So you have to have a pretty good reason for wanting to drive your personal vehicle and share that explanation with us so we can approve it based on that. So this, again, personal vehicle mileage, this is how you submit all that. And then you can just click this line to update and pull all that information in. The next expense I'm going to go over is gas and rental cars. So the thing I want to point out about gas receipts and rental cars, gasoline is a reimbursable expense as long as it's being used in a rental vehicle. You cannot get reimbursed for any gas purchases when you're putting it into your personal vehicle. Again, that's what mileage is for. All right. The key to reimbursing anyone for rental vehicles with gas is that you have to include them on the same expense report. So I might submit this by itself and then create a new expense report that just includes my enterprise rental and my gas receipt. Have one expense report that just has these two by itself, so there's no confusion. I'm not saying that I'm getting a mileage reimbursement and I'm getting gas reimbursement. That just confuses the whole report, and it makes me question, like, wait a minute, did you put that gas in the rental or your personal vehicle? Why are you getting mileage? You see where the questions start to come up. So we want to try and make these as clear as possible when they get submitted, so we don't have to send these back and get more and more bounce back on these expense reports. So so I'm actually going to do that. I'm gonna assume that we completed this expense report and we submitted it for review. For the purposes of this video, I'm just gonna save this for later, and then I'm gonna close it, and I'm gonna create a new expense report. And I'm just gonna quickly get through this test, travel, expense report. You know how to do this properly. Since I just showed you, we'll do another research. We'll click OK. And now we're back to here. So now we're going to click a new expense, and we're going to pull up the enterprise receipt. All right, so we'll pull this into here. One additional thing I want to throw in there to let you know about rental receipts is you should not be requesting the additional loss damage waiver insurance coverage on rental vehicles. WashU has its own umbrella coverage that covers all employees while renting vehicles for WashU business. So you should never select that when it's a domestic vehicle rental. The caveat is international vehicle rentals. If you travel overseas and you rent a vehicle, WashU's damage waivers do not cover rentals internationally. So it is recommended to get the damage, the collision, damage waiver insurance buy-ups for international car rentals. I feel like those happen a lot less frequently, so it's probably not going to happen very often, but I know it does happen occasionally. In this case, this was a domestic rental, and we can see that we didn't, all we got was the vehicle. We did not pay for we paid for the vehicle license recovery fee, which is a state thing, and the time and distance. So we just paid for the base minimum. We didn't pay for any additional buy-ups coverage. The total amount was $180. It shows the deposit was paid on 4/2, and there's the proof of purchase, the Visa. So again, 4/2 is the date, and this is going to be rental car. There we go, car rental. And as soon as you select that, it does bring up again the item details page here. And I did in the first video talk about the travel profile, since I had selected Hertz as my one preferred car rental agency. That automatically filled in for me. In this case, we had Enterprise, so we can just pop open this menu, and we can pull up, instead of the preferred, since that's my one preferred, I can just look at all car rental agencies, and I can select Enterprise. All right, the recipient is going to be me, assuming that I paid for this for myself. No, not recipient, I'm sorry. John Bowdy. And then the class of service. It's a little bit tricky with this, but usually you're going to want economy, Economy cars, I'm not sure what the, let's see, iCar class. I'm not sure if iCar is actually an option here. It is not. I believe the iCar is also an economy car. It's usually that like the e-car kind of thing. I can't remember what iCar stands for, but usually you'll see the class. Oh, here, charge class. Yeah, iCar is the class, and I'm pretty sure iCar refers to economy. If you wanted to provide some additional documentation, you could also just go out to Enterprise and look up, what kind of car is iCar, and then you can add that as additional documentation so that there's some additional information for us to determine that this was in fact an economy rental. And of course, you are not required to enter in the start or end travel dates again, because we've already entered that in the header memo, assuming that you actually filled it out correctly. So the car rental is step one. The total dollar amount was $180 for this deposit. So we add that in there, and then we update the line. And then the second thing would be we would add the gas receipt. All right, so we add a new expense line. We have a gas receipt from 3:30. And we can pull that receipt in here. All right, and this is going to be just type in gas, and that brings up gasoline or compressed gas. It's of course of gasoline. Total dollar amount was $31.50. Again, there's tax in here, but while we're traveling, we don't need to split out tax. $31.53 is the total amount. And that would be all we would need that. So if this was a whole report just by itself, one car rental, one gas receipt, that is perfectly fine. I'm happy having one expense report with just those things, just to make things very clear. All right, so you could submit that. For the purposes of this example, I'm just going to go ahead and throw in my last receipt here. So just to give you an example of another type of travel receipt we might have, we have ground transportation, the MTA in New York. So we pull that receipt in, and we can see this was purchased on June 2nd. And this would be, if you type in subway, I don't know if it'll actually come up. No, it doesn't. How about Metro? There you go. Metro automatically brought in ground transportation. You could also choose, if you chose taxi, taxi brings up a bunch of different options. Ground transportation is correct for that as well. So ground transportation is a big one that we use for travel. And then the dollar amount would be a $20 charge. We're adding to the initial value of $275. So we add $20 there. And that is our full receipt. And now we pulled in the information to there. So you can always click on the line over here to pull the information in and get a running total of what this expense report is worth. And then when you're done, you would click that submit button, and that would be it. A couple of last things I want to just point out, and I know I've mentioned it already, reminders that whenever you're submitting meals, actually that is something that I didn't bring up. I was going to bring up in the previous expense with the social. So let me just show you really quick. If I had a meal receipt for myself or for a group of WashU employees, when you type in meal, it brings up group travel meal, WashU employees, or travel individual meals. So if you had a meal by yourself while you're traveling, you can select this. If you're paying for a group of WashU employees, you would choose this, not social. In either situation, though, if you had alcohol on that receipt, you would still need to itemize it and split out the alcohol portion, whether it was for yourself or a group of people and the alcohol for the group. So those are important notes to know, is that social is only when you're paying for yourself and at least one other non-WashU employee. And then the other thing that I want to bring up is that whenever you're traveling, you do not need to break out sales tax. Even if it's a purchase that happened, in the St. Louis airport, in the promenade or whatever, as you're getting to your plane and you stop for a meal and you get charged Missouri sales tax, we are not required to break out sales tax in that situation. So if you're traveling, sales tax does not get itemized. The only thing that's really being itemized is the alcohol, or like I gave on the other example, the hotel, when you're getting other charges on a hotel bill, like parking or valet, things like that. So I believe I've covered enough for this part 2 of the travel expenses video. Please feel free to contact our office if you have any questions. We're always happy to help. Otherwise, I hope you have a good day. Thanks so much.